Welcome to 4th and 1. I'm Todd Palmer, joined, as always, by Nick. Just Nick. I learned my lesson from last week. I'm not even going to say anything else. His name's Nick. Those of you who've listened to this podcast know him. Those of you who are new, he just likes to be called Nick. He doesn't like to be called anything else. And he's mad at me this week because my wife injected me with the plague, and I've been coughing a lot, and he doesn't want me to get him sick. So far, so good, though, right?
I'm not mad at you until I actually get sick by you. Then I'll be irritated by you.
Well, then you should really be irritated with my wife because I'm pretty sure that sometime while I was sleeping this week, she injected me with the plague.
I mean, I personally, this is just my advice to you. I wouldn't put this on a recording that you can't deny and that your wife knows about and has access to.
Something tells me, my wife, not a big NFL football fan. I doubt if she's listening. And if any of you out there are listening and are friends with her and do show it to her, I will disown you.
Oh, okay. Well, then give me a couple minutes. I gotta go I gotta go send a message real quick.
I can see like you and Therese are just like, that's all I had to do, man.
That's it. That's all it ever took. Okay,
done.
Opportunity seized.
All right. No, but in all seriousness, I will try not to go on any coughing jags, but
don't worry, I did in December when I had that.
Yeah,
one.
no, I know.
That one was bad.
We're an immune deficient podcast here on 4th and 1.
Congrats.
All right, but we want to talk about free agency, and perhaps some people, there seems to be some consternation on Twitter.
Some what?
Some consternation.
What did I tell you about those words, Todd?
Some angst. Is that a better word for you?
Man, you just, it's like you go get a thesaurus before you come into the show.
People on Twitter seem upset.
Much better. It seems like you like, hey, it's like before each podcast you find a thesaurus and you just go find some words to just irritate people.
Right. Really, it's all targeted at you. So because it's just the two of us in this room having a nice conversation and me trying
I don't know about nice, but I mean we definitely are having a conversation.
That's right. There you go.
Inside an enclosed room where you can get your germs all over me.
Yeah. Speaking of which, can we get the strobe lights going for the people on OTT?
No. Oh man, I was concerned I wasn't going to get it fixed. Yeah. My eyes are still flickering right now.
Yeah. All right, so for those of you who don't know, in our little podcast studio, we have lights, and we put this out on Roku and stuff like that. And so Nick was trying to play around to change the color, I believe, to a Chiefs red.
I was testing between the red and the yellow for the people that watch on the intrawebs.
Yeah, and instead he changed it to a strobe effect that was going to potentially kill someone.
If it makes you feel any better, it had different speeds to it. Yeah, and it kept getting faster.
So. All right, but okay, here we go. But
I can't be a DJ at any party.
No, no. So if Nick starts that business after we get fired for this podcast and the mess that it has become, don't hire him. So,
well, thanks. I know who to scratch off my reference list.
That's all right. I'll start the business. You can be security.
All right. So I heard we have a Chiefs podcast.
Not today. Oh man.
What's your question before you start coughing?
All right. Yeah. Well, no, I wanted to. A lot of people might think that the roster is a little deficient too at this point in the season. I know there's been a lot of upset people about the approach the Chiefs have taken so far. So. What do you think about free agency so far? First of all, let's go through Carlos Hyde. You like that signing?
I mean, I'm indifferent on that one right now, just because I don't feel that Carlos Hyde's going to be that. I feel like he can be the power back that Kareem was in some regards. I don't think he has I just don't see the athletic ability from him since he had his injury. Yeah. That's going to really put him over the top and completely be that same player out of the backfield and pass catching and also running. I think he's a change of pace back that can kind of help you get some of those tough yards. And then Damien Williams, I see as a complimentary back. I understand that he had the touches and everything, but there's just I still feel like that backfield's missing the dynamic runner that Kareem was or that Jamal Charles was, and I still think that that's something they need to go find young and cheap in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the answer's out there Certainly not in free agency at this point.
'Cause I think they would have signed it if it was.
Yeah, and look, it was interesting that they, the Chiefs have been linked to talk about maybe wanting to bring in Le'Veon Bell. Of course, Chris Jones was apparently hanging out with him some this offseason and stuff like that. How real do you think that was, and would you have been on board with that signing?
I personally, for me, with Bell, with the way the Chiefs' offensive line is, the reason Bell works so well, and this is where I think he's going to struggle with the Jets and elsewhere, is one, he doesn't have Mike Munchak. So that's going to be a big part of it since he's in Denver. I think if he'd gone to Denver and had to go to a line, I think that could have been possible. I don't know about Oakland, where he was potentially rumored as well. I think he's going to have to change his game because his game's always been based on being patient until the final moment and taking that run block. But you need an offensive line that can hold those blocks and sustain them, so you have that opportunity.
Yeah, to give you the option, because what he does a great job of is kind of pressing the hole, and if it's not there, finding where the crease is.
Right.
And if you remember that Chiefs divisional playoff game, and it was at 16. He just destroyed the Chiefs by being patient, and they were able to, because the Chiefs were out there two gapping on everything, and he was able to just pick and choose his holes and for like 160 and absolutely carved up the Chiefs in that playoff game. And that's his MO. But I agree. I'm not sure. I mean, didn't they just, the Jets, their offensive line, I think, has regressed a little bit this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see how he works out there. At least he'll be fresh. You cannot say that about Carlos Hyde or Damian Williams necessarily. And I agree, though. Do you like Darrell Williams, though? I mean, do you think there's enough there that with a full offseason of health, nutrition, training in the NFL, and with the full offseason to absorb the density of the Andy Reid playbook, that he can make a big step forward and maybe he emerges as kind of a workhorse back this year?
I think that's probably what they're hoping for, and I think that's what they're working with the running backs coach on in that aspect of it. But and this is the thing, whenever you're trying to make a Super Bowl run, and I think this is what people need to remember, is when you're trying to make a Super Bowl run, you leave no questions unanswered if you can. So if you can get an insurance policy, you go out and do it, and that's essentially what I see Hyde as, to where it's an insurance policy with the two Williams, and then if you draft a running back as well and sign an undrafted free agent, I think that's kind of where that position goes overall.
Yeah, and they did bring back Anthony Sherman on a 1-year contract this week, so that's good news. Always good to have the human sausage back in the fold.
Yeah, and then you get the other fullback as well that they signed from Green Bay. So
there'll be some competition.
Yeah,
but yeah. All right, moving on. Tyrann Mathieu. I mean, we kind of covered this. That they love his versatility. Damian Wilson, we talked about last week. Kind of fills a need. Could be a special teams guy if he doesn't emerge as one of the starters in that linebacking core. Okafor. Alex Okafor from the Saints, good defensive end, a serviceable guy, certainly. Maybe not going to be a guy who's challenging for the league lead in sacks anytime soon. I wouldn't expect double-digit sacks from a guy like that, but he's good against the run, and he can bring you a little bit of a pass rush, a little bit of help there. The other big signing, though, and I know I'm guessing you would have been happier if this signing had occurred in, say, training camp, but the Chiefs finally have Bashaud Breeland aboard. You like that signing?
I like it now for this scheme. I think before, I honestly don't think it would have mattered under Sutton. I think they could have brought in, unless they brought in elite lockdown corners. I don't think Sutton, just where Sutton's scheme is at and where it was going, I just don't think it was going to work. It was going to work anymore.
Well, it would have been an improvement over Orlando Scandrick, though, right?
You would think so, but I mean that there's no guarantees in that regard. I honestly, I'm not kidding when I say this. I don't think there's a lot of players they could have put back in that secondary that were going to make a routine, consistent difference over an 18-game season.
Yeah, I think there was some deck chairs in the Titanic there, but anybody would have been better than Scandrick, I think. Or not anybody, but a guy like Bashaud Breeland certainly would have been, I think.
You would have hoped so, but I feel like this scheme can help him shine a lot more.
Well, that was a position. That was definitely a position of need, and I feel like the Chiefs. There were some other options there, whether it was Verrett, guys like that, and the Chiefs struck out. So kind of in the second wave of free agents, I feel like Breeland's a good fit and a good ad, considering what they had to work with in an extremely weak cornerback market this year as far as free agency.
And the guys that they were targeting, what I found intriguing by all that is like the
Ronald Darby, also a guy that they brought in.
The four corners that they were interested in. Darby had the ACL tear, so I'm sure they went through the physical with that, and it just wasn't gonna, probably, in my assumption, it wasn't going to be ready in time and be able to practice and be involved in that scheme. So then he goes back to a scheme he's already familiar with and comfortable with, and allows him to have essentially a 1-year prove-it deal. Verrett, you're trying to buy low, and hopefully it's a big bang for your buck on that aspect.
Yeah, he chose to stay out west though, so
and that's completely fine because I mean, with the injury history he had, you're always just wondering. He's just
gonna get 2 games. You're gonna get 10.
Yeah, is just one play away from being, I hate to say in this regard, potentially career-ending, since he's already had 3 major injuries, and the fourth one, I don't know if he'll be able to come back from that one if that did happen. Hopefully it doesn't. Hope he succeeds, but there's that possibility. And then Darqueze Dennard, that they obviously spoke with and brought in for a visit, as our Therese Paylor reporter from Yahoo Sports, or our pal.
T-Rizzle.
Yeah, he reported that, and then obviously he went back to the Bengals this week. But and then obviously they signed Breeland. But I think the common theme of all of it is they wanted aggressive corners that were versatile, that could play both zone and man, and then could also had good recognition with routes and how to, like I've talked about before, pattern match, and be able to do that part of it. And they're all aggressive tacklers. And so they all are willing to tackle, and I think those are the keys you need to remember whenever it comes draft time with the corners that the Chiefs look at. And I do think they will add a corner or two through draft or undrafted free agency, and I don't think that position's settled yet.
Definitely not. I mean, I think there's a lot of additions that they have to make in the secondary at some point. Right now, do you feel like the draft's not the draft is coming and it is separate entity, separate avenue for adding players, but have they done enough in free agency in your mind yet to make you feel comfortable about their chances of being a legitimate Super Bowl contender again next season?
I personally feel like they're there. I mean, they're on the path, but I also understand the long game here, to where you're going to need the draft as well to help you get cheaper high end talent that you're going to have to coach up.
Every contender needs that, right? I mean, I mean that's historically how the Patriots have built. The long lasting dynasties have been built through the draft. I mean, they're not built through massive contracts that they signed in one offseason surge.
Correct, and so I think that's going to be another avenue of it, and then you'll see what the June 2nd cuts are, and then you'll see what players are potentially being traded by week 3 of training camp, and kind of figure it out from there. So I don't think it's over. I don't think this roster is going to be fully built until early September. So I'm not going to hit the panic button, but I am kind of curious what they're going to do come draft time, and what they build around in terms of the team needs that I've put on Twitter before.
Is there anything else you'd like to see them add before the draft?
I honestly, I don't think there's a lot out there anymore that they're going to be able to add through free agency. There might be some value signings that could be depth that they could go out and get in some spots that probably aren't on my personal radar yet. But overall, I think they've done what they can. I mean, you could probably go get another veteran safety, depending on what price and how cheap you want to get them. You could go out and do that part of it.
Where you at, Trey Boston?
I mean, that's a possibility. But yeah, I mean, overall, I don't think there's going to be a lot left to be able to go out there and sign. And receiver, obviously, Chris Hogan's still out there, if I remember correctly, right now. So there's still a couple receivers, and
Jordy Nelson, another guy.
Jordy Nelson, also the Chiefs supposedly have interest in. I think those are kind of your 2 options. And once those are gone off the board, and a couple safeties like Darian Stewart, and also Trey Boston, as you mentioned, I think after that you're just waiting until draft at that point.
Anybody like a Shane Ray intrigue you at all? Especially if you can get him on a prove-it contract.
He intrigues me personally, but the market, it doesn't seem like it's really been there yet. So I think that's kind of more I'm starting to wonder if that one's going to be like an after the draft market for him.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But I know. Obviously, he's got ties to Kansas City, and that's a position of need the Chiefs still need to address. But you're right. I think a lot of teams may be waiting around, especially on some of these veterans who are going to want bigger contracts, to see how the draft falls, what they end up getting in the draft, and then revisit that in May as they get ready to say, oh, okay, so we still have a giant gaping hole here. Perhaps we should go get this guy.
Right, and there's some players that may be released after they pick up a new rookie that they feel is replacing them. Then they move on from that player. That normally happens after the draft as well.
Well, and then early June, the Chiefs will get a little more money on that cap, with when the Eric Berry signing comes off the books, or the Eric Berry release, sorry, comes off the books. So anyway, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and discuss a little bit more about the future of the Kansas City Chiefs here on 4th and 1. Welcome back to 4th and 1. I'm Todd Palmer, joined by Nick. Nick?
You're gonna keep playing that up.
At least this episode, yeah. After last week,
all because I stifled your creativity of trying to come up with random nicknames.
No. If you don't appreciate my efforts, then I'm not going to give you any more bait, Nick.
Fine by me. Music to my ears.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to change tactics next week. But
I wish you the best in your future endeavor.
All right, but hey, a lot of people, like I said, there's consternation. There's people who are frustrated, upset, whatever you want to say. I used a lot of different words there so that everyone can understand, even you, even you. But
hold on, I gotta call my mom and see what that word means. I'll be right back.
Okay, real quick, what do you think the team needs are heading into the draft? I know you've put this on Twitter. I know we both wrote some articles heading into free agency about what the biggest team needs were. What do you see as the biggest remaining team needs right now?
I still personally, obviously, the number one thing is I still think they're gonna have to at least get one, maybe two edge rushers in the draft. I still see that as a thing they're gonna have to go after. I do think they're gonna need to find some defensive line depth for rotation on the interior, maybe one of those guys potentially as well. And I think that all encompasses together to where they're going to want defensive line athletic pass rushers, and that's where you're going to get that is in the draft. I still see that as a big thing. I think safety and corner are still going to be big ones as well that they're going to have to at least get one in the draft at each spot. Linebacker, they're probably going to need some depth wherever they want to get that, whether it's an undrafted player or something. I don't think that's as high value for what they need, but
but you also have to remember they've kind of had just 5 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers in Sutton's scheme with the way they use the outside linebackers. So that's an area they were always going to have to address when they're switching to a 4-3, right?
Right, and then also wide receiver. I think that's going to jump up there now, and I think that's going to be something they're going to need. I think they're going to need to find another tight end, and I personally would invest in a running back. So in general, I mean, when we're counting this up, 1 running back, at least 1 receiver, maybe 2 tight end, probably 2-3 defensive linemen, corner safety. So at that point, I'm already looking at 9 or 10 spots that you kind of want to go attack. That I personally would feel more comfortable with them addressing here in the next wave.
Are you worried at all about offensive line? Because they did lose Mitch Morse, and they did lose Jordan Devey, who signed with the Raiders this week. So some of that, I know you and I both were very high on Devey and both really hoped that he would re-sign with the Chiefs. So has that elevated the offensive line at all, or do you still feel pretty comfortable with what they've got?
I still think they're kind of status quo with where they're at on the O-line. I think long-term you're going to need to go find some depth at offensive tackle so that you can, if you need to make any decisions.
Like Cam Irving as the backup tackle?
Yeah, no, I'm good on that one. But I do think they need a developmental tackle now to think ahead 2 years in advance to whenever they have to decide on Eric Fisher's contract and then also on Mitchell Schwartz's contract expiring. I do think long term that's something that's further off, but it's something that it's going to sneak up before you know it.
Well, and that leads me to that kind of leads me perfectly into the next question about Brett Veach and his plan. I know what I feel like he's been trying to accomplish this offseason.
Let's hear it, Tom.
Well, it seems to me
Unless
like
you cough, and if you need to tag me and let me know.
Well, it seems like his predecessor was a big fan of making splashy signings, big money deals, but essentially what he ends up doing is, while that may excite your fan base in March, it didn't pay much dividend come January, for John Dorsey. But the other thing is, it ends up locking you in a salary cap hell a year or two down the road, and we saw the results of that this offseason, because the contracts that Brett Veach inherited, Justin Houston, Eric Berry, things like that Dorsey had signed, kind of put them in a bind. I think that Brett Veach knows that you're going to have to pay Patrick Mahomes after next season. Obviously you're going to keep him around. He's the centerpiece of your franchise moving forward for the next decade. You've got to be in a position though where you can maximize this window of time. You know, if you want to have a Tom Brady-esque, Patriots-esque dynasty type run where you win multiple championships, you have got to be smart about how you allocate that money. And I think it starts now. I mean, get those bad contracts off the books, reset the salary cap a little bit, take a hit if you need to here, but be smarter about your money and really kind of follow the Patriots example where they don't overspend on a guy like Trey Flowers. They don't overspend on, on guys. They buy veteran free agents on the cheap, whether it's Alan Bailey, whether it's Randy Moss in the flagging years of his career when he had some character concerns and stuff like that. You take flyers on those guys late, but you build everything else with young guys on small money contracts. And if you absolutely have to, you can fill in gaps here and there. But I think that's what the plan is. And I think that Veach has set it up quite well and made a lot of tough choices, but I think choices that are necessary to set the Chiefs up for a decade or more of dominance under Mahomes.
Well, first thing I'm gonna take you back a little bit to 2017 with the OTAs at that portion. What ended up happening during that time, and I was put it on Twitter earlier this week, is Eric Berry had just gotten his new contract, fresh contract. Dorsey's still general manager. Houston had been given a big contract, two of the highest paid in Chiefs history at that point. Two people you expect to be leaders of your team and really kind of help you push.
Well, Houston's was an NFL record contract, and Barry's was an NFL record contract for safeties, I believe, right?
Right, but I'm saying from a Chiefs perspective, it's two of the biggest ones the organization never given out. So that's a serious amount of respect financially that they're showing you. And then also, like you said, from an NFL perspective. Then you have Dee Ford, who missed a handful of them, Marcus Peters, who wasn't there for most of the voluntary OTAs, and then also you had that aspect of it. Now the other part of it, the frustrating part, was Jeremy Maclin skipped his honeymoon as he just got married at that point. Skipped the honeymoon to attend OTAs, and then when June 2nd rolled around on that Friday, Dorsey released him.
Yeah,
and what frustrated me about the whole thing at the time is the fact that one, your highest paid players are saying that they don't value voluntary OTAs.
Yeah.
And and I understand from an injury perspective that you don't have them, you help them avoid risk of injury, but they could stand on the sidelines, maybe be in the film room if they need to, kind of just let other teammates get the reps, but just kind of be there as moral support or whatever. I don't care, but you're two of the ambassadors of that team now by the financial contract you were given, and for them to not be out there was disappointing to hear. And then and then Dorsey parted ways within a month of that happening.
Yeah.
At the end of that month. So you had a unique time for the Chiefs organization where it didn't seem like a lot of people were on the same page in that regard. And then Dorsey had to release Maclin because he needed to pay for, he needed cap room to be able to pay for some things because he'd put himself up against the cap yet again with the contracts and structures that he had signed and how he'd overpaid this player and that player. And a big part of it that I kind of want to go back to is the fact that each year with their first round pick, instead of in my opinion investing in truly the best player possible, he was always investing a year in advance of who was going to hit the free agent market for the most part. So in 2013, he got Fisher because Brandon Albert was going to be a free agent. In 2014, they got Dee Ford because they were hoping to replace either Houston's upcoming contract or replace Tamba. Never happened. They were here for the long haul, and that never happened. Then in 2015, you drafted Marcus Peters to replace Sean Smith, who was going to be a free agent the following year. And then you ended up getting Chris Jones the following year, because he was essentially potentially going to replace Dontari Poe, who was going to hit free agency. So you were trying to, in his mind, he was trying to keep costs down, but at the same time, you weren't truly taking the best player. You were just taking somebody to financially help you stay under the cap, but maintain a certain level at that position. Instead of maybe you're better at this position, and you kind of, that was a certain approach that he took. So with Brett Veach, what I see with Brett Veach so far, the plan, in my opinion, is they wanted to surround him with Mahomes with everything that he needed to succeed. So whatever he needs, they want him to be the voice of that locker room, and they wanted him to have all the veteran players he needed to make that roster go and to be able to do anything that he needed to succeed. And I think they were able to accomplish that goal. and they were able to bring in a Sammy Watkins, who people say financially doesn't fit what they wanted production-wise. Look where Patrick Mahomes is at. That's what you were actually investing in. You weren't necessarily investing truly in Sammy Watkins. You were investing in Patrick Mahomes being able to have an offense that was easy to read and players who could space it all over the field so that you could attack however you needed to, and he could get comfortable in the pocket and reading defenses. So that was the first phase of it. I feel like the draft last year was their way of preparing for this year, so they knew it was going to be an overhaul, long-term task, and I think they got part of their 4-3 defense last year to pair with what they're going to do this year so that they could have all that combined. And then contract-wise, I think what's refreshing is that he structures it to where it's really just a 3-year contract, so it's not necessarily the long 5-6 years that Dorsey would do, like when Macklin was like 5 years, $55 million, and then, or Barry's was, $75 million over 5, and you had that back end that you still were struggling to get out of, and when you had to make that decision, it wasn't gonna be ideal by any means. So Dorsey backloaded a lot of contracts, put a lot of signing bonus in there, a lot of guarantees that you were stuck in those spots for quite some time. And you were paying premium dollar for production that had already happened versus trying to do it.
Yeah, you're paying Justin Houston $21 million this year for the fact that he almost set the sacks record in 2014.
Right, and it's 2019.
Yeah, and here 2019.
Yeah, and that's where I think Veach is gonna be. This is kind of where that next wave hits, to where the Mahomes, the Chris Jones, and maybe some other players. We'll see how that goes. To where you're paying them for. You're paying them for the production that they're actually going to do and what you project versus paying them for past production that they aren't going to hit at that time. And then also the free agents that they sign, they're actually signing them when they're getting to hit the peak of their contract. And I think Veach is really big on when he goes through free agency, he gets guys from the 24 to 27 age. So before they hit 30, they can move on if they need to before they fall off that cliff in terms of production and injuries and things of that nature. So.
And look, it still remains to be seen. I mean, I think it's fair to be critical of the first draft class because we didn't see a lot of production from Breeland Speaks. We didn't see a lot of production. I mean, Khalil McKenzie, didn't play. You didn't see a lot from it. But I also think that it's important moving forward to keep in mind. Maybe he had an inkling that Bob Sutton wasn't going to be around, and maybe he didn't think Patrick Mahomes was going to be an MVP quite in 2018, and so maybe some of those moves were done with an eye toward the future. I'll be much. I think you can. The other thing is, I think it's important to remember. It's really difficult to evaluate the draft even a year out. I really think you need about 3 years to get a good evaluation of it. So I would say let's see how things go. I think that you and I both agreed that Barry, Houston, and Ford should have been gone off this roster. And look, there are not a lot of GMs who would have felt that way necessarily. There's not a lot of GMs who would have made those moves. And you can go back and listen to why we felt like those were moves that had to happen. But look, I think you got to give Veach credit for doing the necessary things and doing the hard things. I mean, and if you look at it, that's what the Patriots have done so brilliantly, is to be able to identify the guys who are actually the key players that you need to keep around to be at a championship level, and to be willing to let the other guys walk and get their money elsewhere.
Correct, and that's where I don't think Veach is truly. I know some people are going to take it as Veach is truly trying to copy the Patriot way. I don't think it's that. I think it's part of the Philly way.
I just think it's a smart way.
And what Philly used to do, and Howie Roseman used to do this a lot. Roseman, excuse me. Is the player would have 2-3 premium years of production, and then they would try to sign them right there when they're getting ready to hit their peak, just like the Chiefs did with Travis Kelce at that point. And they're paying for where Kelce's at and what his production level is in a correct manner, versus paying Travis whenever his contract ended and maybe overpaying a little bit in some regard. And I think that's where they're going to head down the road here. Whenever there's a guy that truly encompasses what this organization wants as a player, I think they're going to do it when they hit that year 3 point. I think that's when they're going to start paying a lot more of those guys, especially like a Mahomes, to where you don't wait till after year 5 to pay Patrick Mahomes. You try to do that whenever year 3 hits.
Yeah,
you structure it in a way, and then if Chris Jones is able to prove that this year in that scheme, then you do that as well. And then maybe there's another player here or two that you identify that you do that with as well.
All right. We are going to take another quick break, and then we'll be back here on 4th and 1. Welcome back to 4th and 1. I'm Todd Palmer, joined by Nick. And Nick, I think there's one thing that we do disagree on just a little bit. I think a lot of people assumed that this offseason, one of two guys was getting paid, especially once the D Ford trade happened. And it was either going to be Tyreek Hill, wide receiver, or it was going to be Chris Jones, defensive tackle, defensive end. I think that obviously, given the situation around Tyreek right now, where Johnson County District Attorney stood, they're still investigating and haven't made a decision on anything as far as some of the legal issues he may or may not be facing. I think the idea of a long-term extension with Tyreek is off the table. I would be fine with paying Chris Jones. Why are you not sold on a long-term deal for Chris Jones quite yet?
With Chris Jones, what I personally think you need to do is you need to give it until I think end of September, early October. I think you have a number in mind that you want to do. That if he can financially, this is kind of what you want to pay him and what you want to do. And I think that's why you keep this cap space that you can to be able to afford that and do that. So with Chris Jones, I just want to see how he looks in the new system. How do him and the new D-line coach Brendan Daly work together? Is he able to take the coaching that Brendan Daly can help take him to a new level? How does that work out for them? How does he come back from training? Because I know he had the injury after the Titans game, and he had a great year, and he trained hard, and he lost some weight, and he had a really breakout season. I just want to see him in OTAs and training camp in a little portion of the season to see how he performs, and then if it matches up to that, then you give him that payday and you show him that respect.
Just Chris, I want you to know, I'm buying in earlier on you than Nick in this case.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a buying in thing. It's just I think with the changes you have, I think you want to be able to definitely have those answers to where you're like, okay, hey, him, the coach get along. He does well here. He does well there. And all right, let's invest in that.
All right, hey man, before we head to dinner at the place you own with Jake, I was going. I wanted to be sure that we check the tweets.
Yes.
What do we got, Nick?
First one's going to be from Will Return. Why should we expect a better outcome this season than last season?
Patrick Mahomes. I mean, look, it comes down. Look, the NFL is unique in that the best quarterback usually wins. I mean, that's just the way it is. The best quarterback usually elevates the rest of the guys around him. Right now, I think the Chiefs have the best quarterback in football, and I think it's easy to forget. Patrick Mahomes has only actually played one NFL season. He should get better next year. I think he's got the mindset, and I think he's got the relationship with Coach Reid that he will attack this offseason in the way he needs to. I think he's going to learn a lot from the mistakes he made this year. I think Andy's going to have a lot of fun now that he's actually kind of got to test drive Patrick Mahomes. I think he's going to have a lot of fun trying to figure out new things to do with his, with the NFL's shiniest toy. And so I think that just the natural progression of Patrick Mahomes raises the ceiling for the Chiefs.
Well, only thing I got to say is they have a defense coordinator by the name of Steve Spagnuolo. They have Matt House, they have Dave Merritt, and they have Brendan Daly. All those guys combined are less predictable in how they attack and how they cover, compared to Bob Sutton. So that automatically is already going to work out better in that regard. Next question will be from ZW25. With them not signing another safety, do you see the Chiefs drafting a safety within their first 3 picks?
I don't know about first 3. You got to remember, I mean, Armani Watts was a 4th round guy. So you can get some guys that are serviceable. You don't have to spend necessarily, one of your top 3 round picks to get that guy. And I'm actually, with Matthew, you got Sorensen still on the roster at this point, and then you've got Armani Watts, you've got Jordan Lucas, who looks like they're probably going to, I'd assume they're going to sign because they gave that 6th round tender on him. I'm actually a little bit less concerned about safety than I am a lot of other positions right now. So unless there's a great player that you feel like is a perfect fit for your scheme that just falls in your lap in those top 3 picks, I would be inclined to look elsewhere for bigger needs. But look, if the right situation develops, certainly you can get better at all levels of that defense.
I will answer that question later on Twitter to keep us on time. Next one will be Casey Chiefs Cooper. Why does any change mean doom and gloom to the fan base? Can't we just watch, wait, and see what happens?
No, because you got to have the instant reactions, right?
Well, and that's where I think kind of society in general, I'm not just picking on people on Twitter. I think that when you have the next generations coming up, they're so used to on demand and they're so used to instantaneous gratification and having results immediately. Yeah. I think that's just just what us as a society has expected at this point. And
learn to see the forest through the trees. Like there's a bigger picture that you miss if you're so singularly focused on what happened yesterday.
Wow, you're like a fortune cookie.
Well, it also helps when you have children. Oh my goodness, if my children, God forbid, have to sit through commercials now because we didn't pause the show or it's not on demand, they lose their freaking minds. Look, you see it at all levels. I mean, that's where the kids today, you kids out there, learn some patience.
Next question from Henry Matthews. There were reports the Chiefs were looking at Jordy Nelson for a visit. Des Bryant, I believe, is also a free agent. Could the Chiefs look at signing either of those players?
Jordy Nelson, yes. Des Bryant, big fat pass for me.
Yeah,
I don't want anything to do with that.
I've been very vocal when people have asked me about Des Bryant. I don't need a guy coming off of Achilles that couldn't get separation before and probably isn't going to afterwards. And also, I don't need that locker room mentality in here.
Yeah, no. The Chiefs have reached their quota of washed-up divas.
Okay, wow. Saying it like it is. All right, Brad Filbert, if the rumors of shopping Tyreek Hill was true, would there be proper compensation? Would it be as much as New York got for Odell Beckham Jr.? For those that don't know, Jay Glazer from The Athletic and also Fox Sports reported that supposedly the Chiefs were shopping Tyreek before the start of free agency.
There's no way he was going to fetch more than Odell Beckham Jr. I know Beckham had the big contract, but you weren't getting a first and a third back, and another player. No, he wasn't getting anywhere near that kind of return.
I think it would have depended on the team and depending what was going on situation wise. I think that would have determined it.
Well, I still think that with his history and with some of the things that exist there, he's always gonna carry that around with him, as we've seen in the last month. And I just don't think that I just don't think he could have fetched that kind of return.
All right, we're nearing the end of our questions. This one's going to be from Carl. Assuming the rule changes, how often do you think Andy Reid would choose to take the ball for instead of the onside with the 4th and 15 after scoring?
Well, every time. I don't know. I mean, last year I'd take it every time because I don't want that defense on the field.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it remains to be seen. Let's see how the defense does this year and how much faith you can have in them.
Could you imagine that though? Just the Chiefs' defense never sees the field because the offense just
they just have 53 offensive players because you just have Patrick Mahomes out there. Yeah. No, I would imagine last year he would have done that every time.
So, and then I'm going to go to our final question here. This will be from Wesley Peel. Do you think we see another free agent move or trade before the draft?
I mean, I don't think there's going to be a major one. I don't know if there's a major one left out there. I mean, I don't see him signing Ndamukong Suh to a long-term deal or anything like that. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're going to add some more players between now and the end of April. So.
We went through a lot of check the tweets questions tonight, more than normal. So sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I will respond on Twitter to everybody that we didn't get to. So, and Todd, if you want to, feel free as well. Just check the people that replied to that one tweet about asking for questions.
Okay, thanks for the advice, Nick.
Hey, no problem, man. I mean, you've got the.
You got to remember, I'm a little bit older. I am not as plugged in as some of the kids today.
I'm just saying, you have the thesaurus to help educate us all with his new words.
That's true. I'll use big words, and people will then get to hate me on Twitter, in addition to hating me while they're driving their cars or working out or however you listen to the podcast.
Well, I love your sunny disposition right now.
I blame my wife for the plague. So, all right, guys. we hope you enjoyed it. We are going to start ramping up our coverage, looking toward the draft here in the next.
I heard
couple
there's
weeks.
a draft coming up here.
There will be, or will be. I believe it's at the end of April.
It is at the end of April. It's a tradition unlike any other for me.
Yeah,
And it'll be in Nashville this year.
yeah. So go to the Grand Ole Opry, and then get a new defensive lineman.
I mean, I would go get some of their famous fried chicken while I was down
There you
there
go.
too.
There you go. Ooh. All right. Well, if you want to, even though this podcast hasn't come out, maybe you can find us at Gus's. We'll find out here on 4th and 1. Thanks for listening, guys.